Story 1. I slept in the spare room of my friend's house and didn't realize the bloody curtains had an automatic opening time of 7 a.m., which scared the living daylights out of me. Story 2. At a friend's birthday party and sleepover when we were around 11 to 12 years old. About 5 of us were on the back patio making jokes like, "That's what she said," since we just learned about them from the show The Office. I guess I took it a little too far when I said, "I'd like a big rooster in my mouth. That's what she said." As soon as I finished saying it, I looked over to see my friend's father standing at the open sliding door in complete silence. Story 3. I was very young when 2 friends stayed over. I was about to sleep with my eyes shut when one randomly started talking negatively about me, thinking I was asleep, and the other joined in after some hesitation. They even considered I was awake and tried to slap me awake to make sure they were safe. I haven't forgotten about it since, even though it's been about 20 years. Story 4. My friend and I both got diarrhea from eating bad nachos. He soiled his pants, and my dad had to give him a pair of shorts that fit him loosely. Later, we were jumping on the bed, headbanging to Metallica, and his shorts slipped, and I saw his private parts. Story 5. One of the first times spending the night with a friend, I must have been 10 or 11, maybe 12. He was a year or 2 older, and we were teammates. Our families were friends. I realized once I was at their house that the family, mom, dad, my friend, his younger brother, were vicious yellers. It seemed like no conversation could end without some member of the family screaming at another. It was never really violent, but just really wild and loud the entire time. It culminated in the younger brother getting into a huge screaming fight with my friend, followed by his mom discovering my friend's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder medication was missing. This was followed by my friend being accused of stealing and selling his attention deficit hyperactivity disorder medication at school by both his parents, with his mom crying and dad absolutely furious. This led to a car ride to a gas station nearby to meet my parents so they could pick me up, all 4 members of the family screaming at each other, throwing accusations, and calling each other names the entire time, with me just sitting there like, I was very excited to go home. Story 6. Stayed over at a friend's house in high school. As the night wore on, I realized that the house was filled with cockroaches. They were even in the bed. I slept on a chair because it was too late to go home. Story 7. Had to sleep in a room with a bunch of snake tanks and about 10 old-school mechanical ticking clocks. The next morning, the kid's dad ran him down in the backyard for something trivial and beat him. He's been in and out of prison since 16. Poor bastard. Story 8. I have mentioned this in another comment, and I still have never been able to rationalize it. I was friends with a twin as a preteen. Obviously, she and her twin shared a birthday. One year, they had a huge sleepover with both their friend groups. We were all having a blast, and when night came, we realized it would be really cramped if the 2 friend groups tried to squish into the 2 girls' respective bedrooms. I suggested we all sleep on the floor and couches in their downstairs living room. The downstairs was its own suite, separate kitchen, bathrooms, everything. It was nowhere near the parents' room and brother's room upstairs, so there was no way us doing this would affect anyone else in the family, and we were all girls. But according to her parents, my suggestion was the equivalent of high treason and blasphemy to the highest degree. They fully berated me in front of all the other girls at the sleepover and told me that wasn't allowed and also stupid. Alrighty then, so we all squeezed into the 2 tiny bedrooms, and nobody got any sleep. I figured at the time it was one of those things I'd eventually understand as an adult, but here I am, 30 years old and still baffled. Story 9. I slept on a cot under a punching bag with no pillows or blankets when I was a teenager. Every time I went to turn over, I hit my head on the punching bag. Story 10. I slept over in Aberdeen, a very cold place in Scotland, and her parents didn't let her have any electric blankets or thick duvets. It was freezing the whole night. Her dad kept coming in and asking if we needed anything, but when I said I wanted a thicker blanket, he just laughed as if I was joking. Story 11. I was sharing a bed with 2 friends, and at one point in the night, I heard one giving the other oral sex. I just pretended to be asleep until one of them started groping me. He said, "Come on, dude. I can handle both of you." I just said, "No, thanks." And he went back to the other. The thing is, we were 14 and I barely knew them at this point. I never mentioned it. Story 12. When I was about 12, I went to a sleepover at my best friend's house for his birthday. His family was great and I always felt welcome there. The sleepover was pretty typical. We watched a movie, ate junk food, went to bed but didn't sleep. We just stayed up all night talking and eating sweets. At the crack of dawn, we snuck downstairs to play a game on the family personal computer. Everything was going well, and the strategy we had planned during the night was working perfectly. But then, out of nowhere, probably due to sleep deprivation and a sugar overload, my friend had a full-on seizure. He let out a guttural moan that terrified me. Panicking, I ran upstairs to wake his parents, and they quickly called an ambulance. He was taken to the hospital for tests with his dad going along. His mom, still calm and kind, offered me some breakfast before I grabbed my things and walked the short distance home. As soon as I saw my mom, the shock of what had happened hit me, and I broke down. Thankfully, my friend didn't have any serious health issues, and we are still best friends to this day. In fact, we have even been each other's best man. Story 13. One of my classmates had a big campout in her backyard in elementary school. I was already scared, but then we kept hearing sounds outside. The girl just shrugged it off and said sometimes their elderly neighbor wanders around their backyard. I was so scared I ran barefoot in the pitch black to their house and fell asleep on their couch. Story 14. We were talking and laughing in her room after her parents told us to go to bed. Her dad came in and spanked both his daughters and then me for still being up. I told my mom about it and she said I should have gone to bed then. It wasn't a gentle pat either. It was full force while he screamed at us until his face was red to go to bed. After he left, we just lay there in silence with the light still on. Breakfast was quiet the next morning too. Story 15. I stayed at a popular girl's house when I was in my preteens and still learning how to manage my period. We all slept in the common room on a futon with a sheet covering it. And yes, there was a situation in the morning. I'm still mortified when I think about it. Story 16. Well, I wouldn't call it a sleepover, but after a night of drinking, I completely blacked out. The last thing I remember is me and some friends walking in pouring rain because no taxi would take us. When I woke up, I had absolutely no recollection of how the last night ended. Then I opened my eyes, and it was pitch dark. I was violently hungover in a completely dark room, somewhere. Every step I made, I stumbled into something which fell on the floor. It took me around 2 minutes of moving slowly around the room trying to find a light switch. After 2 minutes, I stepped on something soft and heard, "Ouch!" I almost soiled my pants. I found out it was my friend. I had stepped on his groin. He told me we are in his cellar-turned clubhouse. Pretty weird few minutes when you wake up not knowing where you are, and there are no visual clues to give you an idea. Story 17. Back around 1995 to 96, my best friend and I slept over at another kid's house. Let's call him Bob. We were around 13 years old. My friend and I had hung out with Bob a few times, but neither of us had been to his house. We met at Bob's and things started out fine. His living situation was different than either of ours. Bob lived with his 2 younger brothers and a single mom. They struggled to make ends meet and lived in a townhouse in a rougher neighborhood. No big deal, but I had lived a pretty naive and sheltered life to this point, so it was different for me. Bob's mom left frozen lasagna for all the kids. Bob was in charge of looking after the 2 younger brothers. She was going out on a date and would be back later. We ate dinner and were all having a good time. The little brothers went to bed in their rooms. My friend, Bob, and I were going to sleep in the basement in sleeping bags. We stayed up late in the basement. Out of nowhere, Bob asked if we wanted to see his mom's personal item. I didn't know what it was, but my friend did. It vibrated and we all touched it. I asked what it was for, and Bob and my friend said, "She pretends it's a male organ." I pretended to know what that meant and nodded my head like I was saying, "Yes, of course, how foolish of me." I assumed it meant she pretended she was male. I clued in months or years later when I learned how those items were used, and the memory of this sleepover popped into my head. Then around 1 or 2 a.m., headlights from the driveway were noticed shining through the basement window. Bob looked outside and said, "Oh no, pretend you're asleep or we're in trouble." Being a naive kid, I was terrified. I could hear a lot of footsteps upstairs above us. At least 3 or 4 people were upstairs, including Bob's mom. Eventually, it quieted down, but Bob and my friend had already fallen asleep. I lay on the floor, terrified and wide awake all night, and rode my bike home around 9 a.m. In hindsight, Bob was just a kid who was exposed to some things at a young age and grew up fast because of it. He was often home alone or left in charge of his brothers. So he explored the house and found those items, I guess. His mom would go on dates, and sometimes there'd be a few more drinks at home at the end of the night with friends or people she had met that night. Bob just didn't want to get in trouble for still being awake at 2 a.m. Looking back now, there were no signs of abuse or anything bad happening. It was just very different from what I was used to, and I was scared and uncomfortable. It was a 2 out of 10 sleepover experience, with the 2 points being for the lasagna. Story 18. Put on the song Rape Me by Nirvana. A girl in attendance asked what rape means. We tell her. She breaks down crying, saying that she thinks her dad raped her. I never listened to the song again. Shortly afterward, my friend moved in with her aunt. We are adults and she is doing great now. Story 19. We both made so many jokes about being gay and how we would like to have sex that we actually couldn't sleep close to one another and woke up every time one of us moved at night. Story 20. I was at my best friend's parents' house when I was 12. My father's brother came to their house in the early afternoon to pick me up and tell me my mom ended her own life the night of my sleepover. Never forgave myself for being out. Thank you for your support. Yes, 40 years later, I am in a much better place. Married, kids, great career, etc. In the end, my mom's biggest challenge was my father's adultery and abuse. She decided that was her way out. Unfortunately, it left me in a tortured state for 2 years until I got a full scholarship to a boarding school and later to university. My father and I had rarely spoken from then to his death last year, when I was in such a positive state that I was indifferent to the news when his lawyer called to tell me that he left me $5. Story 21. I was in a small friend group in elementary school with this girl named Jess. Jess and I were the closest out of all the girls in our group. Jess invited me and another girl, Paris, over early for a pre-party gathering. During this time, Paris was acting crazy. She ran all over the house, doing all sorts of things. At one point, she found a chair with wheels and was rolling around the house on it. She eventually ran into one of the walls and made a dent. She later pulled some things off Jess's walls by accident. The rest of the kids arrived later, so now there were about 10 of us. There was only one bathroom Jess's parents would let us use, which was attached to their bedroom. They didn't want us having full access to it, so they made us line up to use it every few hours. One of the times I got paired with Paris. We would go in, one of the girls would step into the shower while the other used the restroom. I used the restroom first and Paris was still being disruptive. She kept peeking around the shower curtain to mess with me and kept opening and closing the shower curtain really fast. When I told her to stop, she decided to grab the shower curtain bar and pull herself up. I finished using the bathroom and went to the shower. The curtain rod looked bent and I was adjusting it when it collapsed on me, obviously due to what Paris was doing with it. When we came out of the bathroom, Paris put all the blame on me, and Jess's mom believed her. I tried saying it was Paris who did it, but her mom told me it was rude to accuse other people. I got a very stern talking to, and I was pretty much ignored for the rest of the night by Jess and Paris. The next morning, most of our parents came to pick us up. My mom offered Paris a ride home since my mom knew her mom, but Paris declined, saying she was staying a bit longer. Apparently, I hadn't been invited to the post-party gathering. Jess completely stopped talking to me after that night, and I still don't know exactly why. I'm guessing her mom disliked me after that night and convinced Jess to feel the same way. Story 22. Somehow in elementary school, I got an invite to a popular girls' sleepover party. I knew the host was really into playing hide and seek. I planned to win the game and cement a real friendship with her. I climbed into a closet in the basement and covered myself up with the stuff that was on the floor. I promptly fell asleep. I awoke hours later to find a search party for me. I wasn't invited back. However, this really wasn't my biggest party foul of the night. Story 23. I was strongly encouraged to be friends with the weird neighbor kid and eventually attend a sleepover at his house. He was nice and probably had a learning disability. I was too young to really know about makeup, but his mom apparently wore a lot of it. I got up to find the bathroom in the middle of the night, and when I came out, I was confronted by the ghost of his mother asking if I needed anything. I cannot imagine how she must have felt explaining that she was not dead, but merely had removed her makeup.